Hi everyone. I'm really sorry I've had to cancel the session today. Full honesty, I double booked myself. I made a mistake. So what I've done is I've recorded this just the day before to give you kind of the latest thinking around IMCA. So this will probably be a quicker session than the hour because obviously there'll be no chance for questions or discussion. So Mental Capacity Act, as you know, introduces rights for people to have an IMCA in certain decisions. And there's two decisions where we say that the person, there's a duty to instruct an IMCA. And that word duty is really significant because it means that the local authority it's a legal duty. They have to. If the person's eligible, they hit the criteria. And a quick recap of the criteria is that they lack capacity to make the decision about where to live and they don't have anybody to support them through that to represent them, then they have to have an IMCA. It's a duty to instruct an IMCA. So the two decisions are serious medical treatment and long-term change of accommodation. This session today is going to look at what we mean by a long-term change of accommodation, some of the things you need to be thinking about when you're supporting and representing a person through that decision. First thing to explain is what is a long-term decision. And the Mental Capacity Act does helpfully tell us, and it's very straightforward. It's either a move where you're living by the NHS into a hospital for more than 28 days, or by the NHS or local authority into a care home for more than 8 weeks. Now, a quick note on respite or short-term moves that wander into 8 weeks. So it could be that the local authority moves the person, let's say, from hospital into an assessment or a reablement place. And the intention is that that's just going to be for a week or two. That wouldn't be classed as a long-term accommodation move. However, let's imagine that things don't go to plan or there's a change, and then that arrangement is likely to go above 8 weeks. At that point, that needs to trigger a long-term change of accommodation decision. So at the point it's known it will become more than 8 weeks, that's when you need to have the long-term change of accommodation. And the whole thing about the phrase long-term change of accommodation, it's really service land. It's really clinical to describe it as a long-term change of accommodation. When you buy a house, when you move into a flat, you don't call it a long-term change of accommodation. You call it moving home. You call it moving house. So I'm going to use that phrase from now on because this is somebody's home. We're talking about somebody moving home, moving house. There are different types. I'm going to actually do these slides in different order. There are different types of homes and different types of arrangements. It's possible that the decision might be to stay at home. Actually, it might be between going into a residential care home, or it might be to stay at home but with extra support. That's an absolutely valid option. You can have care homes and residential care. You can have care homes with or without nursing. And then there's some other arrangements I popped on this slide. Excuse me. Sheltered housing, extra care, you're probably familiar with them. That's people in their own house, but there's support available perhaps on site. Supported living would be when people perhaps stay in and give more hands-on day-to-day support. Shared lives is a wonderful scheme whereby an adult, it's often described as foster care for adults. I don't know whether that's a bit patronising or whether it's a great description. I can never make up my mind. But essentially, it's a family who open their home to an adult who has needs for care and support. And the idea is that the family welcome that adult and support them to live their own independent life as much as possible. But it's more like familiar, if that makes sense. So they're the different types of accommodation that we might be talking about when we're thinking about local authority and ICBs arranging it. I'm going to go back a slide just to put on your radar that when you get a referral for IMCA, change of accommodation, sometimes there can be confusion about what's the decision being made. And I think that one of the first things that one of the first questions you need to ask is what's actually on the table here. Is the decision between, care home A, care home B, and staying at home? So they've already identified a couple of potential places to live, and you are literally then comparing what's life going to be like for the person in this care home, what's it going to be like, or likely to be like for this person, this option. Sometimes they haven't identified an actual home and they'll come to you and it's almost like, well, we just need to decide what type of provision, should it be a care home? Should they go into a home? I think that's more problematic because it can be a little bit abstract. And I would push at that point, particularly with the local authority, well, it's not just should John go into a care home, it needs to be a named care home because you need to look at what that care home is offering and how that's going to impact on, let's say, John. So just a kind of a little thing to put on your radar. Okay, so IMCA role within change of accommodation is the same as all advocacy. It's about the person's wishes and views. So we need to get really underneath what does the person want. And that will be thinking about, we'll be thinking about where they've lived in the past, what type of places, are they urban, are they rural? Is the person introvert? Are they extrovert? Do they like doing things or do they like, their own company? I often use my husband as an example because once he comes home and shuts that door, he doesn't want to speak to anyone. He doesn't want, the idea of community. He's not interested. I don't think he would care about where his care home is as long as it did A, B, and C. Me, on the other hand, I would need to have a care home where there's people I can talk to. I prefer it busy. I prefer it loud. We're all different, aren't we? So your job as an advocate is always to get underneath and think, what's life like for this person? So we're looking at the person's wishes and views. And we're essentially asking that question, if they could make the decision, what do I think it would be? Now, because you're using non-instructed advocacy, because there's going to be a lack of capacity there to make the decision, that's not going to be straightforward. But that's the kind of the North Star, isn't it? That we are trying to find out if the person had capacity, what decision would they want? So we're looking at research and information. We'll find out information about them. Hopefully you'll know the person, so you might know what's important to them. And really critically, I want you to think about supported decision making. So supported decision making is when we help the person to make their own choices. And in IMCA, I think sometimes in non-instructed advocacy, we rush to the representational. It's kind of, I need to gather information and write my report. As much as you can, try and slow that down and help the person take control over where they're going to live. And crucially, and this is going to sound so obvious, but sometimes we forget to do it, or you might even be told you can't do it, which is nonsense. But what we have to do is we have to make sure the person can visit the home that's being proposed, ideally more than once, ideally for an overnight. It's only then really that the person can decide whether that's somewhere that they like, whether if that's something that they choose. Now you're probably sitting there thinking, "Oh, it's fine saying that on a webinar. We can't do it, or we don't have time." I would urge you to make time, please. Demand that part of the process for choosing this person a home involves the person visiting the home, and then you and others can observe how the person reacts. The last 2 points on this slide is really about the process and checking that the decision maker has done the best interest decision making properly. So you might be thinking about the principles of the IMCA, the best interest checklist, but really think about that least restrictive option. And remember, the IMCA talks about least restrictive of the person's rights and freedoms. So which option has that lesser impact on the person's rights and freedoms? That's what we need to think about. So I'd see the your IMCA role in kind of 2 chunks. One, all about P, all about the person. What choice would they make if they could? And then the second one is like that audit function. Check, challenge if you're worried, but check that the process is being done properly. Oh, now I don't know why my dolls has dropped an S. That's a bit strange, isn't it? Anyway, I wanted to have a little nod to doles. So this is deprivation of liberty safeguards. If the person's eligible for IMCA, in their oh, something's strange going on my presentation here. If the person's eligible for IMCA within a change of accommodation, it's probably likely that there'll need to be a deprivation of liberty, authorising the restriction. So this could be because they can't consent to the arrangements, or there might be additional restrictions being placed on that individual. So if the person lacks capacity to consent to the placement, the arrangements, the doles will be sought. And you might want to think, well, who's going to represent that person through that process? Now, if they've got an IMCA for the change of accommodation, that means that there was nobody to support them through that process. It's not automatically given, therefore, that they'll not have anybody for the doles, but it's likely they won't have anyone. So I think for lots of change of accommodation decisions, you might want to be having a forward think, into the future, who's going to be the 39A IMCA. And, in the ideal world, that would be you, because you know the person, you're building up a relationship with them. As an IMCA, and you're thinking about doles, the three things I'd be thinking about is A, to flag up early that there needs to be doles authorisation. They can apply 28 days in advance. So I've put that in the report. Be thinking about the least restrictive option, and I'd be thinking really carefully about if the local authority go for option A or option B or option C, do I think the person would want to object? Because if it's likely that they'd object, then I need to flag that up to the local authority really early. Okay, I'm sorry about my layout on the slides. It didn't look like this before when I did them. But I wanted to have a slide on Care Act and IMCA and how it overlaps. So a bit like the doles, if somebody's having an IMCA for change of accommodation, they're probably going to have a doles IMCA for 39A. Similar to Care Act, actually, that if you've got somebody where the local authority is arranging an accommodation move, it's probable that individual has got a care and support plan. So if the local authority are meeting their needs and they've got a care and support plan, then it should trigger Care Act advocacy. And that could be, so the 3 stages in Care Act where you can have an advocate is the assessment, the care and support planning stage, the review of that plan, and also safeguarding. At any of those points, there might be an accommodation move. So at the assessment point, there might be an accommodation move. That often happens where somebody's coming out of hospital. So let's say somebody's had a fall. They've been in hospital for a few months. They're now coming out of hospital. They can't go back home. It's not safe. There needs to be an accommodation move into somewhere where it is safe. And then that adult might suddenly find themselves having an assessment for the first time because they're eligible for care and support. In that case, you'd have a Care Act for the assessment and an IMCA for the change of accommodation. It makes sense that those two people are the same. And it's just obvious, isn't it? Kind of, why would I want 2 people doing essentially the same job, which is advocacy? So if you're an IMCA or a Care Act advocate, but if you're an IMCA in change of accommodation, I'd always have an eye on who's doing the broader care and support planning. And that's the question I'd ask. What is the broader care and support planning for this person? Now, it's possible, of course, that they don't have a care and support plan, but it's more probable that they do. So if they do, check. And as I say, in an ideal world, that would be you doing both. Okay, so report writing. The Mental Capacity Act is really clear that you will write a report to capture your findings. Now, the first mistake people write when they write reports is they describe what they've done. So I read lots of IMCA reports where it's like the story of the IMCA. I met John on 14th of May. I explained to John. John was very pleased. John was clean and looked happy. John appeared settled. I spent time talking to John. Advocate. We're not interested. I know that sounds a bit daft. We're not interested in the report. That goes into your case notes. So all that content of what you've done goes into your case notes. Your report is not what you've done. Your report is what you've found out about the person. So think about the report as a way of it's the person's voice. You know, if they had capacity, they wouldn't need a report to capture it, but they lack capacity. So you are there as their voice. The report needs to put at the front and center the person, not you, not what you've done. What it needs to do is to put forward what you've found out. So that could be from talking to the person directly, that could be from observations you've made, it could be from talking to people who know your partner, so carers, professionals, but it's about what you found out. And when you come to write your report for change of accommodation, I would sit there and I would close my eyes and I would hold the person in my heart and I would call them to my mind and I would just think about them for a few minutes. And then I would think, what is the most important thing that the report reader needs to know about them? So if it's John I'm supporting, what's the most important thing the social worker needs to know about John? Well, the most important thing to John is playing cricket. Now you might think, what's that got to do with change of accommodation? Well, actually, it might be very important because he likes to go on the bus to watch his local cricket team all throughout the summer. And one of the care homes that's being proposed is on that bus route, and it'd be dead easy for John to carry on going to cricket. That is critical. That needs to go in the report. Or it could be that John absolutely loves cats. He's always had a cat, and his best friend is a cat. He's got no children, and his companion is a cat. One of the care homes that's being considered has a no pets policy. That suddenly becomes really, really important. So it's always thinking from the perspective of your partner, what matters to them, and how is that going to impact on the choice of where they live. We might be thinking about what obstacles need removing, and we also might be thinking about things that we need to trigger. And I'm really thinking there of things like assessments, OT assessments, or if there's hoarding, getting a specialist in to advise. But what is it that we need to unlock to make whatever the person's preferred option, happen? After the move, so we're now kind of jumping ahead in time a little bit. So the person has moved into their new home. The Mental Capacity Act says that there should be a review of that accommodation move, and as an IMCA, you can get involved and says you should. Now, it's not a duty to instruct an IMCA; it's a power, which basically means if they think it's in the person's best interest, they should. What I would say is when you get a referral for any review, is that you ask, what is it reviewing? In my experience, local authorities refer to advocacy when there's a review of the care plan. It could be a review of the dolls, and it could be a review of the accommodation move. It could be all three. The first question is what is it that's being reviewed? And what the Mental Capacity Act says is an IMCA, particularly if they're involved in the change of accommodation, then it's helpful for them to be involved in that first review of the move, the accommodation move. And yeah, your role is advocacy. Is the move working? Did it go to plan? Is the person happy? Are they objecting? Are they not happy? Are they not objecting but not happy? And we need to think a little bit more about what's going on for John. But yeah, there is a trigger there for IMCAs under the Mental Capacity Act to get involved in review of accommodation decisions. And that, my friend, brings us to the end. So a little whiz through change of accommodation. Yeah, I will send this out to everybody registered on the session. And if you've got any questions, please do reply to that email with any questions. All right then, take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.